Okay, greetings, brethren. Thank you again for joining us for yet another edition of Shepherd's Voice magazine on YouTube. Why don't we just get started? And what I might try to do is put a Facebook link to, there's been a GoFundMe, before I get started, there was a GoFundMe reach out by a pastor from the Church of God Seventh Day that I work with, or I joined his Bible studies and got to know him over a period of time. But he's got a grandson in need, and there's a GoFundMe page that was presented, and he's sent it to me personally. I'm going to put that link to that GoFundMe page down below, and hopefully, if you're able to click on it, maybe you can help our this pastor's grandson out. The details are in the link, but I just wanted to put that out there and see if we as brethren can help a brother who's reached out. I've always been reminded, give to those who ask of you. And I mean, there's some discretion that we need to use in that, but we need to do that, especially for the household of faith. And so I'm going to put that link in there. Please take a look, click on it, see where it takes you. And I'm hoping that this gentleman, Mike Wallace, of the Church of God Seventh Day, who's become a friend of mine, I'd like to hopefully that we can give him some consideration, because we will here, Kim and I will as well. So this is a very recent situation, and so I just want to put it out there. That's the best I can do. You're all able to decide on your own who you're willing to help. Okay, I'm going to go to 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 11. I'm going to bring it into context a little bit, and then we're going to go from there. All right, 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 11. This is a faithful saying. For if we died with him, we shall also live with him. If we endure, we shall also reign with him. If we deny him, he will also deny us. If we are faithless, he remains faithful. He cannot deny himself. And we're going to explore those words in a future time. And then he seems to transition. But the transition isn't fully, doesn't pull away from this altogether. I want us to think about the next phrases he puts here, or the next words of Paul to Timothy. Remind them of these things. And he says, charging them before the Lord not to strive about words to no profit, to the ruin of the hearers. Be diligent to present yourself approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. We're going to revisit those. I got them bolded in here. We're going to kind of get into this a little bit with some one example at least, or two, depending on time. In verse 16, but shun profane and idle babblings, for they will increase to more ungodliness. Apparently this has been predicted as going to happen. Profane and idle babblings will increase to more ungodliness. We do not want to participate in these kinds of things. And their message will spread like cancer. Hymenaeus and Philetus, whether I pronounce the names right, I'm not sure, are of this sort, who have strayed concerning the truth, saying the resurrection is already past, and they overthrow the faith of some. Nevertheless, the solid foundation of God stands, having this seal. The Lord knows who are his, and let everyone who names the name of Christ depart from iniquity. Now I want to go back here to verse 14, which is basically the focus of this presentation. Remind them of these things, charging them before the Lord not to strive about words to no profit, to the ruin of hearers. So these striving about words, and I'm going to try and go to an example or two, depending on time, but at least one example. The striving about words is therefore not innocuous. There's some to the ruin of the hearers. It's not innocuous. Words can be stretched to an extreme to make a doctrinal case, and I've seen that, as we'll see here in just a minute. Now, what experience did Paul have that caused him to bring this up to Timothy? He's just not writing for the sake of writing. There are some experiences that he's had in his ministry, in his apostleship. Well, apparently these speculations were derailing prospective believers and believers from the track of God's actual truth. And they were born out of, evidently, striving over words, which is deriving a whole teaching over words, making a whole doctrinal case over words. Now, the idea of the resurrection already past, we may say, oh, I would never fall for that. But at that time, there was a lot going on. And there's other things going on today. But, such a mistake may seem very strange to us. How can they make such a mistake? But things were ripe at that time for wild speculations. While the apostles and others who were very diligent in the faith and very circumspect were holding it together, but there was many of those who had these wild speculations and then just went with it and just couldn't let go of them, like these characters here of the sort who have strayed concerning the truth. And I have influenced and overthrown some, so it was very real. And it's still real to this day with speculations. But so today, there's these fresh speculations, particularly out of I would say, the Hebrew roots movement. I mean, it's everywhere, okay? But this is sort of like a part 3 of, kind of exposing this Hebrew roots movement idea. And so it's even in traditional Christianity and all these things we tend to point the finger at, but I'm just looking at something here as a Sabbatarian and a Holy Day observing individual. I can see the influence of that the Hebrew roots movement could have. So we're going to look at an example or two, as I said. But we want to be of the class that rightly divides the word of truth. Not going with every wind of doctrine, as it says in Hebrews, but have a good and solid foundation and know what we're hearing and having our senses exercised to hear, oh, that's off. Or that's right, but not quite right. And we have, through reason of use, which reason of use means that I think, we've made our own mistakes. And we need to own up to this kind of stuff. But reason of use, in order to rightly divide the word of truth so that we be approved before God to continue in teaching. Because if we don't do that, if we're not approved, God would not look favorably on us. And we want God to look on us favorably. That James, in his epistle says we need to take this seriously. In chapter 3, I believe, my brethren, let not none of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment, for we stumble in many things. And that stricter judgment comes in real time. It's not some sort of end of life, resurrected, getting judged kind of thing. It's this kind of judgment he's talking about here is coming under God's closer scrutiny and discipline. And stricter judgment by the brethren, too. He doesn't say by who. So we need to get it together. We need to be very circumspect and very careful about what we believe and what we teach. And if you're unsure, we need to... In the council of elders, there is security. Talk about them. Talk about these things. So, striving about words. Let's start here. Let's be clear about something called language. Language. Let me ask this question, and we'll see if we can kind of get this thing to flow and develop the thought, because we're going on a journey here together a little bit for the next half hour or so. Can one word in a language, a word, okay, mean one thing in one context and describe something different in another, in the same language? Absolutely. Absolutely, over and over again. And I'm not going to go into a bunch of examples, but we'll get to one here in just a second. In fact, it can, and what this illustrates is how flexible, because it can mean one thing here and another thing here in a different context and another thing here, or it can sound the same but be spelled differently over here, and English is especially guilty of this, okay? It illustrates how flexible language really is. Language is a flexible thing. All languages, all of them that have ever existed, have certain flexibilities. And I'm not the one, you may say, well, where can you prove that? You can go find it out for yourself. I'm not going to prove that, but they do. It comes out of necessity. It absolutely does. So here's the problem. Therefore. The foolishness, the absolute foolishness of the way some of us approach Bible study, where we try to insist that this Hebrew word or that Greek word or that Hebrew word or phrase means exactly the same thing everywhere, or is to be interpreted always the same way. That's an error, a common error in approaching Bible study and expositions of certain scriptures. And in teaching, it's a very foolish thing to allow us let this happen. To insist that one word or one phrase means everything everywhere in the Bible. That doesn't work. It's simply not true. And I got a lot of support in saying that. It's the same way in English, it's the same way in Greek, and it's that way in Hebrew and every other language. Ancient Hebrew. All of them. When I've talked about before during Pentecost, when the Pentecost occurred, we have these tongues of fire, cloven tongues of fire, and we talked about this, and people started talking, and Luke spent considerable time with all these different people from different cultures, speaking different languages, talking and expressing themselves, and they can hear their languages and praising God. We're not going to go there, and I'm not going to recount it or go anything. But the point that Pentecost shows is that language is not to be a barrier to spreading the gospel. God has made provision for this, and he's showing this in a dramatic way in the book of Acts on the day of Pentecost. So not one language is superior to another. It's just not relevant anymore. God is faithful, and he recognizes the shortcomings of all languages, including Hebrew, including Greek. God is faithful. And those in the Hebrew roots movement, in general, want us to believe that Greek and English is insufficient or even corrupt language, and Hebrew is a sacred language. And the more you understand Hebrew, the more you can understand God's word and the gospel. And knowing Hebrew enhances understanding. That is incredibly, incredibly misguided. It is a misguided thinking. And there are those who I've talked about in the previous message about this, that they believe in a proto-gospel written in Hebrew and then it was translated to Greek, so we don't really have the authentic. There's so little evidence for that. In fact, it could be shown to be wrong because you see Paul quoting from the Septuagint. So I don't know why anybody would make those arguments, but it sounds more authentic to talk Hebrew. Hebrew is just as corrupt as English. And I know of a few flaws in my studies. I know of a few flaws. Not that they're particularly flaws either. They're just characteristics of the language. And we need to understand them. Well, we don't need to understand them. I just happen to know a few. We just need to understand when somebody starts saying that Hebrew or proto-gospels are more authentic, then we need to kind of distance ourselves from that kind of thinking. The problem is, therefore, as we approach words, and when I say we, I'm being a collective because we've all been guilty of this in some form or another, approach words or phrases with the idea of a kind of a mechanical perfection where that perfection does not exist. It does not exist in Greek, as much as I admire, Greek language over time of studying it, but it doesn't exist. Any language that ever existed. Languages, none of them, not Hebrew or Greek, let me emphasize this again, and not English, none of them are perfect in that way, and in the sense that God is more responsive to one language than the other, or the gospel can be expressed better in one language or another. Forget that stuff. Don't get striving about words. Don't get striving about languages. It is to the ruin of the hearers. It's a black hole, brothers and sisters. It's a black hole. We're touching on it today so that we don't go down that rabbit hole, if you would. So that's why Paul told people, don't get involved in striving of words. Don't strive over these things. What you're looking for is not words, it's meaning, and meaning is found in the context, both small and great. There's a big context that the whole Bible contains, or big portions of the Bible, or the New Testament context, the Old Testament, or there's big context there, and there's some that are very small, very right in the weeds there, maybe. Small and great. And you're not going to find your answer by pursuing strong concordances all the time, even others. I found those Bible helps, the Bible dictionary is very helpful, but always you got to pull this thing in totality and be careful. You may not understand the author's intent by going to a Strong's definition. All right. How about an example? I want to present an example to you. And it's nothing what I'm going to present here. It's nothing personal about the individuals who presented this. It's nothing personal, but all teachings are fair game, and I've talked about this before. All the teachings that are on this channel with Darren and I or others, it's all fair game if somebody wants to challenge them or criticize them or outright find a way to discredit them. This is nothing personal. It's nothing personal, and we just need to understand that it's about the teachings. The teachings are fair game. So here's an example I most certainly want to try to cover here in this best way as I possibly can. Many of you are familiar of the Greek word ekklesia. In the past I've pronounced it differently, but ekklesia, that Greek word ekklesia, this keeps floating around right now. Translated many times to church or assembly in the New Testament, but primarily church. Church, the ekklesia. And it's been evolved into the point where now when people would rather use the term, I think, ekklesia instead of the word church, because the word church, people have difficulties with. It's like doing church. Is it a verb? Or church is a building? Or going to church kind of thing. And the word church is not, it's been sort of somewhat come an unfavorable popularity or lack of popularity lately, so they rather use the term ekklesia to be more authentic. So let's explore this case here where we might be striving over a word like this and maybe getting into trouble, doctrinal error. That can get even worse depending on how it goes. So I learned about this group called 119 Ministries, and they are most certainly a Hebrew roots organization. A lot of members, a lot of people associated with them. I first learned of them at one time, and what I did is, like, you can put your name in there and see if you can find people of like mind. I didn't know too much about them, so I did put my name in. I did retract it, but it never happened because I don't think it's properly monitored. But to see who is a Sabbatarian and holy day observing individual in this region. So a group got started or restarted maybe 45 minutes from here, and I may have mentioned them before. A couple of months ago, we got started up, and they call themselves the Philadelphia Assembly's Fox Valley. So Fox Valley is 45 minutes from here, but they're associated with another group in Philadelphia. But it's essentially a Hebrew roots group. And they're Sabbatarians and the holy days, etc. But they're on the Hebrew roots, Torah-based group, and I believe they've tied themselves to 119 Ministries. But anyway, I got an email 2 or 3 months ago saying, come out and visit us. And so I started paying a little attention to what's going on. Paying attention to their YouTube channel, and I went to their website and I've talked about some of the issues there and their claims on the website and etc. And but recently, 2 of their elders, I'm not sure how it's described there, one was named John and Rob, did a presentation and the title was, Who is Israel? And I'm putting the link below to that YouTube video so that because I'm going to present some of it here, but if you want to see the whole thing, by all means, go and watch it at your own time, whatever you want to do. But there was a portion in there I decided that I think I needed to address. I can address the other claims, but the who is Israel and fundamentally what this group claims and others is that they believe that the New Testament church, the ecclesia, is Israel. We are Israel in some form. And that's the claim. And I think that's the general claim of the Hebrew roots, Torah-based or Torahism ministries. So I gave it a watch. I spent some time giving it some time. So, but you can go there anytime you like. But for the sake of time, I'm only going to use a portion of what they talked about. I'm still yet to fully edit it, so I'm not sure how long it's going to be. But I think I'm going to give you maybe as much as 10 minutes of the claim that the church is Israel, one of the arguments. And this portion I'm going to let you watch here is the segment of the word ecclesia is being argued as equating to Israel. So I'm going to step away for a bit. Don't worry, I'm coming back. I'm going to transition, let them. It's fair game. It's on YouTube. I'm going to just let them have the time and how they present their argument. And remember, these are Sabbatarian, holy day observing individuals. They don't observe Christmas. Good for them. And I'm not judging them one way or the other. They don't keep these pagan days, and they study their Bible as best they can. But I want to take you to just transition over to a portion of their video. And I have to edit it for the sake of time, I believe, because there's a lot of scriptural references they use, but you can go to the link anytime. But for the sake of brevity, I'm going to have to edit it a little bit. All right, so I'm going to step away, but don't worry, I'll be right back.
I want to talk about the word Israel and the word church, because today, especially in just a lot of modern day Christianity, we hear, well, we're not Israel, we're the church. Or, Israel's a separate thing. The church is its own thing. I want to point out a couple of scriptures here, and then I want to talk about the Septuagint, the LXX, the Greek Old Testament, because the New Testament, as we have currently, is in Greek. So I want to show the comparison of words being used and show that in the Old and in the New, all 66 books of the canon, we see the same word being used to describe Israel and the church. There is no separation. In fact, they're equivalent. So Israel equals the church, which is ecclesia in the Greek, G1577 in the Strongs. G, as in Gary, 1577 in the Strongs, which also is equivalent to called out, or kahal in Hebrew, and that is H6951. So these words are equivalent. Ecclesia, kahal, Israel, church. All of it is the same. It is all equivalent. And I want to go to a couple of quick hitting spots in the New Testament. We'll go to Matthew 16 and verse 18. We'll start there. Matthew chapter 16 and verse 18. Very famous verse that Yahushua, Jesus, says to Peter, Simon Peter. One verse, here it is. And also I say to you that you are Kepha, or Cephas, and on this rock I shall build my assembly, or church, and the gates of hell, or Sheol, shall not overcome it. On this rock I shall build my church. That word is ecclesia in the Greek. Ecclesia is equal to Israel. So really, the proper translation would be, and I also say to you that you are Cephas, or Kepha, and on this rock I shall build my assembly, or I shall build Israel, and the gates of hell shall not overcome it. I want to go to Acts now, chapter 2, verse 47. Acts chapter 2 and verse 47. So this entire chapter is about those who have the same beliefs. We're coming into the, some people call it the New Testament church after Jesus went up to heaven. Yahushua went up to heaven. So I'll start in verse 46 just to continue the sentence, but it says, and day by day the people were continuing with one mind in the holy place and breaking bread from house to house, and they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor or grace with all the people. And the master added to the assembly those who were being saved day by day. That word assembly is ecclesia. The word ecclesia is Israel. So again, they were praising God and having grace with all the people, and the master added to Israel those who were being saved day by day. They added to Israel, i.e., equivalent to the church, equivalent to assembly, equivalent to ecclesia. All of those words are equal. So really, we're talking about Israel here, which goes back to what Paul had mentioned in Ephesians 2, which is what we kicked off this entire lesson with, the fact that we are Israel. We can be a part of that set-apart commonwealth of Israel. So it's just something that's very interesting. I also want to get into the word, the use of that word ecclesia in the Greek Old Testament. So as we know, for most of our translations out there today in the New Testament, we have Greek, right? So we are able to know that in the Greek, we could see certain things in the New Testament, but there is a Greek Old Testament that is a thing called the Septuagint. And I want to show that word ecclesia was used almost in every place that the word Israel was used in modern day Hebrew translations. The first instances come in the law of Moses, or the Torah, in terms of the use of the word ecclesia. The assembly at Horeb, when Yahuwah spoke directly to the Israelites, was called on the day of the ecclesia. That's in Deuteronomy 4:10. On this occasion, God commanded Moses to, quote, gather the people from before me. And that's the verb form of ecclesia used in gather, again in Deuteronomy 4:10. It was on this occasion that God made his covenant with Israel, ecclesia, church. The law will reference this important day by simply stating, quote, on the day of the ecclesia, the sacred assembly of Israel for worship and official business was the ecclesia of Yahuwah. for worship and official business, that assembly of Israel, was called the ecclesia of Yahuwah, the ecclesia of God.
I'm back. Now, I guess the question is, when you heard the argument, for me, I can detect the flaws very quickly. So the question is he right? Do you think he's right? Well, the argument is flawed. And though he says he's proven something, it actually is not proven. The argument is flawed. And it's an understanding, again, of just language. And it doesn't take too much research to know this. It again goes back to the striving over words and understanding the imperfections of language. That all languages are flawed in some form or another. Or they have certain characteristics that need to be understood. Flawed is probably a stronger word to use. But we're going to go with it. Now this Greek word, ekklesia, does not have its origins in Scripture. Neither does any classical Greek words. Ekklesia is a classical Greek word. Let me kind of give you the real definition of it. There's the Strong's definition, but even the Strong's definition doesn't leave this one out. It means any assembly of people, or any group, okay? Even though he quotes the Strong's number, right? Strong's is interested in biblical interpretations mostly. But we'll see let's hear this out. And if my brothers over there in the Fox Valley congregation have gone this far and have watched this, you hear this out. You have to hear this out. This Greek word doesn't have its origin in Scripture. It wasn't created to describe Israel. It wasn't not a noun or anything that would describe Israel or the church. It's a classical Greek word. Its original use, its original creation, was the assembly of citizens in city-states of ancient Greece. That's where that word originates from. And you go look this up again on the internet and go find your own sources. The basic meaning of the Greek word, the Greek ekklesia, is assembly or gathering. In ordinary or in original Greek, it most often refers to the citizens of a city gathering to decide political issues, and less frequently to an assembly of the devotees of a god. He brings up the Septuagint in his argument. The Septuagint is the Greek Old Testament. This goes way back, predates Jesus Christ, okay? The translators of this, from Hebrew to the Greek in the Septuagint, had no authority to declare that the ecclesia is Israel, so nor do we. They never even claimed that. This is playing a game with the word. They pulled that word, ecclesia, for assembly, okay, out of the Greek inventory of words that already existed. And I want to go as proof of this. Okay? There's just a total contradiction I'm going to put to you against what was being presented here just a few minutes ago from our friends there in the Fox Valley, is in Acts 19. And I didn't even have to look. I knew it was going to exist. I knew, just from the definition, I knew I could find it. I'm not bragging or anything. I just know you can find the contradiction. In Acts 19, in Ephesus, in a city full of Gentiles, Paul was there, his friends, and there was a big disturbance going on. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through what happened in Acts 19. Go there and read it for yourself about all the trouble that they were stirring and causing grief and angst to the established pagan system there, and how people were making money off of certain goddesses and these things and this kind of thing. But I want to go to Acts 19, verse 32. Let's just go there. Some therefore cried one thing and some another. For the assembly, the ecclesia, right there in your Greek, right there what Luke wrote down. The ecclesia, the assembly, was confused, and most of them did not know why they had come together. Verse 40. For we are in danger of being called in question for today's uproar, there being no reason which we may give to an account for this disorderly gathering. And then he had said these things. He dismissed the ecclesia. Excuse me. What do we just? Wait a minute. I thought ecclesia was Israel. According to our brothers at the Fox Valley Church. Just cross it out and put Israel in there. So that is a contradiction. That is a flaw in their argument. So here we have ecclesia that was confused, and there was a disorderly gathering. And I say this maybe tongue-in-cheek, they might as well have used the word church here, if you know what I mean. I've been in some disorderly church services, and the confusing things and what's happening. I just kind of laughed in myself. Maybe church when I'm in such a bad translation here. But mostly ecclesia was translated church because the focus was the assembly of believers. But that's not what the term means. It doesn't mean church. It doesn't mean believers. It doesn't mean Israel. It just means a gathering of people, and its origins is mostly to do, or overwhelmingly to do, as I stated before, an assembly or gathering in ordinary original Greek most refers to citizens of a city gathering to decide political issues and other things. That's what that term means. It doesn't mean Israel. We just can't strive over words and make up these stories. It's totally made up to create that definition. So we can see the problems here with that argument. The term was never invented for the purposes of being a noun for the Church of God or where the people of God are assembled. Luke understood this. We see it here in his writings. He absolutely understood this. Who am I to argue against Luke? He was there in the real time. He was there. If you were there, you say you could transport it back in time, walked up to him and said to him, where's the ecclesia? Because I'm saying it in the original Greek. He would say, what ecclesia? What are you talking about? You're looking for a group of people somewhere? Or you're looking for a town hall meeting somewhere? What is it you want? Now, if he said the ecclesia of God, the assembly of the brethren, yeah, you can, here they are over here, I'll take you there. So this is the problem with language. We need to be careful and foolish and irresponsible with it, quite frankly. So I know that this might burst some bubbles of those who are against the word church and rather use something more authentic like ecclesia, but whatever. I'm not concerned about that. I'm not going to strive over this subject. This is the last time I'm going to be talking about it. I don't want to keep talking about these things. This term was not invented for the Septuagint to exclusively describe Israel either. So we can't play this word game saying, well, in the Septuagint, the same word is described Israel and it's also described church. No, that is stretching things way too far and saying that you've proven it. You have not. It is a total error. And it's the thing about language that is being overlooked. And it so happens so often in presentations and the foolishness of the Bible study to say it means one thing, therefore is. We need to be very careful about that. Languages evolve. They evolve. And if you go to Google Translate and you put the word church and want to find out what it means, what the word church is in English or in Greek, it'll say ecclesia, and vice versa. It'll just say church because that's what it's come to be known as. Assembly apparently is another word now because things evolve. Languages evolve. But there's nothing Israel or church authentic about the word. It's not there. It doesn't exist. So I might burst a few bubbles, etc. So here again, here we have the error of the way. Some of us approach Bible study, and here's a case to trying to insist that the Greek word has to have the exact same thing meaning everywhere, or it has to be interpreted always the same way. And don't make the argument exceptions don't define the rule. That's just not even, and it's not even closely has any credibility. So we've kind of said here, look, it doesn't work. I'm sorry to my Hebrew roots friends. Nothing personal. I'm just saying it just like it is. And there's other cases that we can get into. I will briefly say, for example, why is this happening? Let me see. Why is this happening? Why is it so important to these presenters and elsewhere? It's this identity thing. I believe, and I'm not going to judge anybody's motivation or intentions or emotions or internal thinking, but I can tell. I can certainly understand that people look for an identity. They have identity crises. And when you want to identify with Israel, say we are Israel, and then be ecstatic about it, that means there's an identity issue going on. We look to something physical. We try to find some other identity. And we need to be so careful about this. To introduce Israel as part of the identity of a believer and try to persuade people of that. Because that throws in a whole pile of other problems and questions. And it can cause a lot of distress. And there's other distress. There's a lot of distressors that we can encounter if we start to say we are Israel and start saying how much the law is binding on Gentile believers and all these kinds of things. And I've discussed that in previous messages. And we'll revisit that again sometime soon. It's good to have a good summary messages sometimes. The same thing has happened, say, in another identity crisis where Anglo-Israelism is another huge identity crisis that has come up. And some people just can't let it go. And I've had one fellow, when I wrote that article about Anglo-Israelism, exposing it. He just, he was working with me and he just didn't want to accept it. He just wouldn't want to accept that America is either Ephraim or Manasseh. And I showed him some examples. And the example I gave him, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I'm going to close out very quickly, because you can go to the link down below to Anglo-Israelism, brief exposure and refutation about this term. And I spend a lot of time on it, and it completely just eradicates the idea that in Genesis 49 and verse 1, at the end of days, what shall befall you on the end of days? And he's talking to Israel. And so many, and I've seen very well studied people in the Church of God, and it's kind of an embarrassment overall, that insist, people are well read, and have written books, and contributed to this, and they insist that the end of days, in Genesis 49 verse 1, is the end of the age in the sense that before Christ comes. So they insist that those prophecies have to do with Israel and now in our times. And it's completely false. And that could be demonstrated. It can be demonstrated because there's a certain phrase, the end of days, doesn't always mean the end of the prophetic period of time before the millennial sense. Even in the Brown Drivers Briggs lexicon, which I showed him, and he said, well, what do they know? They may not be right. I showed him, but I showed him this. End of days, a prophetic phrase denoting the final period of history so far as the speaker's perspective reaches. These guys are smarter than us in terms of the scholarship, but I'll anyway go on. The sense thus varies with context. The sense thus varies with context, but as often is the ideal or a messianic future. And says Genesis 49 verse 1, of the period, he talks about of the period of Israel's possession of Canaan. And I've shown this very expressly, especially with Ephraim and Manasseh, that those prophecies were fulfilled in the time in the promised land. And you can go to other verses where this is, by without a doubt, this expression, the end of days, does speak to the period of time that they are in the land of the promised land, towards the end of their time before they fall away. If you go here to Deuteronomy, you can go to here Deuteronomy chapter 4 and 25 and verse 26 and further. I'm going to read here, when you beget children and grandchildren and have grown old in the land, this is the promised land, and act corruptly and make a carved image in the form of anything, and do evil in the sight of the Lord your God, and provoke him to anger, I shall call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. But you will soon utterly perish from the Lord, from which you cross over the Jordan to possess. This is the land he's talking about. You shall not prolong your days in it, but will be utterly destroyed. And what is he talking about here? Let's go here to Deuteronomy. I didn't put those particular verses in here in my notes, so you just have to bear with me here just a little bit. Here we go. This is why it's so much easier to put things in the notes. You have to flip through pages. All right. Deuteronomy. And here in chapter 30. This is the context of which he was speaking about, going into the land. So let's keep on going here in Deuteronomy Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 30. Here we go. Bear with me, brethren. Bear with me just a little bit. Chapter 4. All right. And let's see what happens. Pick it up here. So this is what he says, and that was what he says in verse 25 and verse 26. Let's pick it up here in verse 30. When you are in distress, and all these things come upon you in the latter days, when you turn to the Lord your God and obey his voice. He's talking about the time of their falling away, in the latter days of their time in the land. There is no question about this. This is not an eschatological time in where it reached to a messianic future. He's not talking about that here. You can go study it yourself. But I feel I'm kind of botching this just a little bit, because sometimes you've got to put all this context together. But just go ahead and read the article. It goes and it exposes the whole idea. And this is a case, again, where there's an identity crisis, and they want to insist that the nation they live in is Israel. It takes away the energy of the gospel. It does exactly what Paul says, striving over words to make a case in a doctrinal case. And this is what Paul's warning us about. Paul is warning us about the same thing, this doctrine of angelicalism for identity. All right, brethren, I think I've made the case. I got some editing to do for this video, so I am going to sign off here. God bless all of you. I hope this message has been edifying and maybe even corrective, and giving us something to think about a little further, and not to strive about words, and go back to what Paul wrote to Timothy, which we're going to revisit, the faithful saying, because we want to be faithful, because that's really the bottom line. All right, so I'm signing off now. Take care. Thank you for joining us here on Shepherd's Voice Magazine. We'll see you here next time. Take care.